Hi, I'm Bob, and welcome to Between the Sheets, where we look at Microsoft Excel and related technologies. I do a lot of Excel training, and one of the features I get the most requests for is to show what pivot tables are and how they work. And I understand. If you aren't familiar with them, they can seem a little scary, but they really don't need to be. So, in a nutshell, here's the story. Pivot tables help you summarize and make sense of a lot of transactional data. So when you see a typical Excel sheet, let's say that has columns for January, February, March, whatever, and rows of product 1, 2, and 3, that's already a summary. Your data is already summarized, so pivot tables aren't going to do very much for you in that instance. But when you have raw data, the raw data that makes that kind of summary, like a long list of every order from every customer, and hopefully each customer is placing multiple orders, that's where pivot tables come into play. And they will help you make sense of all of that, especially when you have a whole lot of data. Pivot tables are really great for that. So let's go take a look and see how it works. Okay, so here we have a sheet of transactional data, and let's take a brief look and see what that is. We have typical customer information, typical order information, like order numbers, who they are, where they are, what they're ordering, and so on. And we've got about 200 records here, 200 rows of data. I'm just going to scroll down to the bottom. So this is pretty understandable data. And the idea here is that each of these customers can, or hopefully, will place more than one order. So Jess or Mara or Sophia will place one order today, another order later on. So there's no summarizing going on here yet. That's what the pivot table is going to do for us. Now, before we even create the pivot table, my advice is let's turn this sheet into a regular table. You don't have to do it, but I think your life is going to be a lot easier. So what I'm going to do is this. I'm on the Home tab on the ribbon bar, and over here where it says Format as Table, I'm going to click that drop down, and I see all of these different table samples. Now, on yours, maybe you see some of these samples already visible on the ribbon bar. That doesn't really matter. I'm going to choose one of them, and Excel throws this Create Table dialog, and it correctly guesses where we have all the data. And that's because this is a pretty neat cut and dry sheet, and it recognizes that the table has headers, so that's row 5, and you can see the marching ants. If I scroll all the way down to the bottom, let's do that. So you can see down here, so we've got about 200 rows. There's the marching ants all the way down to the bottom. Let's go back up to the top here. So I'm going to click OK. It creates a table. I'll just click somewhere to deselect. And now if I want to, I could go and sort and filter. So I could maybe go up to variety here and filter out some of those varieties and so on. We're not really going to talk about tables too much in this episode. But because I turned this into a table, you notice that on the ribbon bar, we are in the Table Design tab. Now, maybe if you click somewhere and you're not really paying too much attention where you click, and you click outside the table, you notice that Table Design tab goes away. So you have to be clicked somewhere inside the table to have that Table Design tab appear. Even before, again, one more thing before creating a pivot table is I want to give a name to this table. So on the left side of the ribbon, it just has a default generic name of Table 1. I'm just going to delete that, and I'm going to call this Orders. There we go, and you'll see why in a moment. So now that we have a table and it has a name, still on the Table Design tab of the ribbon, I could go over here and click Summarize with Pivot Table. Now, let's say you had not turned this into a table first. Then what you would do is you'd go to the Insert tab and Insert Pivot Table. So I'm just going to go back to Table Design. I'm going to click here, Summarize with Pivot Table. Now remember, this table is called Orders. So when I click it, it says here, okay, what do you want to summarize with a pivot table? And by default, there's that table called orders. Now, maybe if I had several other sheets here, maybe if I had several other tables on this sheet, all with names, then I would be able to choose a different one, but orders is the one that we have. Now we've got two choices. Do we want to create this pivot table on a new worksheet, or do we want to put it on an existing worksheet? My advice is always put it on a new worksheet. It'll be easier to work with, easier to manipulate. If you want to copy it, delete it, whatever, it's just pretty clean that way. That's why I'm really not crazy about putting pivot tables on an existing worksheet. If you really do want to do it, though, put the pivot table all the way at the bottom. Don't put the pivot table over on the side. If you put the pivot table on the side, it's just not going to work. All kinds of weird things are going to happen. But anyway, we're going to choose new worksheet. Down here, add the data to the data model. We're not going to look at that in this episode. Maybe we're going to talk about that in a future episode. I'm sure we will. So click OK. And notice we now have this blank screen. You might wonder, hey, what happened to my data? Well, down here, you notice that it gave us a brand new worksheet. So if I click the sales worksheet, there's the table. Remember, the sheet is called sales. The table is called orders. And there's this sheet one. I'm just going to double click that and call that PT so I will remember what it is. So now in this empty box is where we actually construct the pivot table, or that's where the pivot table is going to go. Over on the right is where we do the construction of the pivot table. And notice we've got all of these fields listed, and you might need to scroll through them. And these are all of the fields. These are all of the columns that we saw in the original sheet. And you see we've got these 4 boxes that will let us determine what field is going to go into what part of this table. So let's go and start doing it. So maybe I will take month, and I'm going to drag month down there into rows. And now immediately we have rows for each month. And I'm going to take variety, and I'm going to drag variety into columns. So now I've got the variety across the columns. And what goes in the middle there, when you create a pivot table, is usually going to be a calculated field, or it's usually going to be like the sum of something or an average of something. I'm going to scroll to the bottom, and you see there's that dollar sale, and I'm going to drag that here into some values. And now we see a summary of the values. Now we can also apply a filter if we want. You don't have to, but you might find it helpful. So let's say I want to filter by state. So I'm going to go and take state and drag that into filters. And now I can filter by state. I could filter by more fields if I want. Let me scroll down here. And you see we have type. So the type is wholesale or retail. I could take that and I could create another filter. So I could drag it either above in this filter box. I could drag it above state or below state. And whichever one I do, that appears up there. Let's zoom in on this a little bit and we can start playing around with it. So the first thing is maybe I want to find where some of these numbers come from. So for example, January Colombian coffee is $40, and I want to know which orders went in there. Now, one thing I could do is I could go into sales, and I can go and filter out. I could go here to variety and filter out everything but Colombia, and then I could go to month, and I can remove February and March and just leave January, but there's an easier way of doing this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on that 40 in the pivot table, and notice now we've got a brand new sheet, and you see that's what's happening down on the bottom. This is another sheet, and this has extracted all of those records that go into that 40, and you can see there's just a few of them, so you could add that up in your head. Now there is no connection between this table and the original table, or between this table and the pivot table. This is just like a copy and paste. It's just for your convenience. And you can play around with it. You could even run another pivot table on this if you want. But this is just a good way for you to see how that data are getting in there. So let's just go back to the pivot table here. And maybe let's get to the pivoting part of the pivot table. So right now we have the months are row headers and the varieties are column headers. So let's say we want to switch that so that maybe going down column A, we've got the varieties, and going across row 5, we have the months. So all I have to do is in this area here where we've got varieties and columns and month is in the rows, all I have to do is switch them. Now I could drag them out and then drag them back in, or I can simply go in here and switch them. And now we've pivoted the pivot table. So the months are now column headers instead of row headers. The varieties are now row headers instead of column headers. Let's do some filtering since we brought these filters in. So the top filter is state. So I'm going to click that down arrow, and this shows me all the states. So maybe I just want to see a few of the big states like California, Texas, New York. Notice there's no checkboxes here. What I have to do is down on bottom where it says select multiple items, I gotta put a check in that, and that enables checkboxes for all of those. Now it's going to be really tedious to start deselecting all the states I don't want. So you see on top where it says all, I'm going to click that. So right now there's none selected, and I'm going to check off, let's say there's California, and let's find maybe New York there, and Texas, and maybe let's do Florida as well. So we'll get the 4 big states, and click OK. And now I see the numbers have adjusted. And now all of a sudden, we're getting some pertinent information like, hey, in these 4 big states in February, we didn't sell any Ethiopian coffee. And then you can start asking questions. Why not? What happened? And find that out. Now, because we are viewing just 4 states of all of the states we're selling to, this now says multiple items. Maybe I only want to see 1 state. Let's say I just want to see California. So I'm going to hit that down arrow again for this all. I'm going to click that a couple of times. It's an easier way than deselecting all of those. Now I'm going to choose California, click OK, and now it shows me specifically California because that is the 1 state. And I can say, hey, in California, not only did we not sell Colombian in February, we didn't sell Ethiopian. Again, why and what's happening? And this is where you start being able to make some business decisions. Let's set that back to all. So we have all of the states. And now we have the type. And there's 2 types. Hit the down arrow. We have retail and wholesale. Again, I'm going to click in this box to select multiple. Maybe right now I just want to see retail info, so I can deselect wholesale, click OK, and see some of that info changes. Maybe now I just want to see wholesale instead of retail. I can enable one, disable the other, click OK, and again, I've got some other info going on, and I want to see both of them. Again, I can just go back in there and make sure that these are both selected. Let's do a little bit more pivoting, because we can go and make some subsets. For example, instead of having the months as column headers, maybe you want these months to be subsetted, indented, underneath each variety. So you could have Blue Mountain and January, February, March under it, Columbia, January, February, March under it, and so on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over here on the right side on this task pane, and I'm going to take month from columns, and I'm going to drag it underneath variety in that rows section. And now everything is subsetted. So I have each variety, and underneath each variety is the month. Maybe I want it the opposite way. Maybe I want to have each month, and under each month, I want to see each variety. So what I could do here, and it's a little cramped for space just for the purposes of this recording, hopefully on your machine it's a little bigger, I can actually go and drag this up so I don't need to see all those field names right now, so I can see this. What I want to do is I want to switch the order of variety and month, drag one up or drag the other below, And there we go. And now we've changed it. So now we have each month, and under each month are the varieties subsetted. Notice also that to the left of the month, and this happened before when we had the reverse, we've got these little minus signs. So that way you can collapse detail that you might not care to see. So maybe I just want to see the detail for March, but not January or February. I can click those minus signs. So now I'm hiding the detail of January or February, but I see only the detail of March. And if I want, I can now click those plus signs to get them back again. So now I can see all of the detail. Now, right now, this is showing us a summary, right? This is simply adding everything, and that's typically what you want, but maybe not necessarily. Maybe you'd rather see an average. So down over here in this quadrant where we've got the sum of sale and the sum values, I'm going to click that drop down. I go to value field settings, and you see right now this is using the sum function, so I could go and choose average, and again this is updating the name of that, and we could edit that if we want. I'm not going to take the time for that right now. I click OK, and now I see these are averages. Now, because an average is doing division, this might happen that you might get some long obnoxious decimals, and we can go and format that. So I'm going to go back over here to where we've got that average sale, hit that down arrow, go to value field settings, and in this same dialog box, I'm going to click number format. See that button in the lower left corner. And I'm going to go to number and decimal places. Maybe 2 decimal places is fine, maybe 1, maybe I don't care about seeing any. That's entirely up to you. I want commas for thousands separators if any are there. Click OK. We're back in this dialog box. Click OK again. And now this is showing us just those 2 decimals, or however many decimal places you wanted. Now, a few other things. Because we are in a pivot table, we've got a couple of context-sensitive tabs on the ribbon bar. So I'm going to go to this pivot table analyze. I'm not going to go through every setting here, but I just want to show you a few important ones. Probably the most important item in this pivot table analyze tab is refresh. So let's see an example here. We were talking about Colombian before. So in January, the average is 13.33. So let's say we discover that we've sold a lot more than we thought. So I'm going to go back here to sales. And here's why having this as a table really makes life easy. I'm going to go to month, and I'm going to filter out so we see just January. And variety, I want to see only Colombian. So I can see where all of that is coming from. And let's say we discover, oh, gee, we made a mistake here. Deirdre didn't order 2 pounds, she ordered 20 pounds. So let's correct that. So I'm going to change that from 2 to 20. So then this changes from 10 to 100. But when we come back to the pivot table, notice that hasn't changed any. You have to go and refresh, and you have to do it manually. So, and you actually have a choice. You could hit refresh, or you could hit that down arrow, and refresh will refresh this one pivot table. Maybe if you have multiple pivot tables there, refresh all will refresh all of them. So let's do that, and now you see that average has changed. A few other things. Field list. See over here we've got these highlighted items. That will simply turn that on and off. These plus and minus buttons you see, like I was showing you before, for January and February, those buttons, you could turn those off if you want for whatever reason. And field headers, I'm not really sure why you would want to turn that off, but you can if you want. Let's go to the Design tab, and here you could apply some color designs. Those don't really work all that great, but let me show you a few other things here. Row headers, you can make those unbold or make them bold again. The same for column headers. Banded rows, you can turn on banded rows like in a regular table, or you could have banded columns if you want to do like that. And you've got these other 4 options. Let me start on the right and go to the left. Blank rows. Right now, this is all kind of squished together. Might be a little hard to read. So when you go in there and choose Insert Blank Line after each item, see now you've just got a little bit of extra space. Just makes it a little easier to read. Here, you notice this thing as I scroll tends to jump. That's just some video weirdness. I'm going to leave that in there. Report layout. Right now, what we're looking at is what's called compact form. This is outline form, and this is tabular form. So the numbers are all the same, but it just depends on how you want to look at it. I'm going to go back to compact form just because that's the default. Grand totals. So now down on the bottom, let's scroll to the bottom. Right now we've got that grand total or a grand average. If I will take this, I'll go to value field settings. I'm going to set it back to sum. And by the way, you notice there's the commas. And if we decide that, we really don't need those decimals after all, I could go back in there, go to value field settings, number format, and I want 0 decimals. And OK it, and OK it. So now we've got rid of those. So that grand total we've got down on bottom, and we could go there and we can turn them off if we want. Turn it off, or I can turn it back on again. And the same for subtotals, right? Each month has a subtotal, or if we had this the reverse, so that we had the varieties as the main item and the month subsetted. Either way, it's going to be the same thing. So we could choose not to show subtotals. We could put subtotals at the bottom of each group, or the default is to have them at the top of each group. One last thing I want to show you, and that is, what if you want to remove one of these items? Maybe I don't really care about filtering by type. I just want to be able to filter by state. So I'm going to go in there. Let's move some of this. And I want to remove type. Right there's type. I can take that, and all I have to do is drag it out. Notice there's that X, and that's gone. And now I'm filtering only by state. There we go. So that's gone. And now I can filter by state again. Now there's a whole bunch of other features and techniques that you can do with pivot tables. I can't show you every single thing soup to nuts just in this one episode, but I think what I've shown you here will be enough to get you started.